Recording.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sean Harvey here with Success with Dynamic Duo and my lovely, beautiful billionaire sister, Julia Patterson. What are you guys doing today? What we're doing today is we're interviewing a special lady, young lady from the Toronto area, Sharon. Julia is going to tell you a little bit more about her story, and we'll get right into our show. Stay tuned and be prepared. Turn off all your distractions. Fasten your seatbelts. You're in for a ride from the Canadian Trio. Go ahead, Julia.
Thanks, Sean. Welcome, Sharon. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Sharon is, as Sean said, is from Toronto, and she is the Business Development Ninja. I love that name. That's awesome.
Thank you.
But just to give you a little bit of background about Sharon, because we don't typically talk too much about what a person does on here. But Sharon she was born in Canada. She's from Montreal, born in Montreal, but she grew up in Sydney, Australia. So she now has chosen to make Toronto her home. She won't tell us how long she's been living there, but she kind of washed over that one. But she's done a lot of different things: hotel sales, worked at the airlines, travel agencies. She's been a professional meeting planner and supplier and relations, but she became a professional coach in 2002. And she was doing that before coaching was very well known. So Sharon she's worked on herself, obviously, and she knows how to inspire and motivate herself. And I know she has a lot to share with us today. But one little thing I wanted to share with you today is she was working as a coach full-time while she was working at a senior sales manager position in a 4-star hotel. That's amazing, totally amazing. But what made her quit, I got goosebumps when I say this. You do too. She quit being an employee when she had a hotel guest murdered 2 years ago in her hotel. That's just so sad. And that must have been just horrible for you. I can't even imagine. So her personal and business philosophy is you have to be a leader in your own life before you can ever lead other people. That's totally amazing, because as Sean and I have realized too, and Sharon, obviously you've done it as well, is you have to work on this before you can manifest anything out here. Because you have to believe in yourself. You have to get rid of your crap in your own head. I mean, like, I was pulling the weeds out of my flower beds in my garden this weekend, right? And I've been paying the price because I've been sore. Trust me on that. So Sharon really wants to help people become superheroes in their lives and in their business and career. And she says her guilty pleasure is being a committed people watcher. I love that. That's just absolutely awesome. So Sharon, thank you again for being on our show today. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And if you wouldn't mind I've shared that kind of, I guess, that bomb moment when you realized you needed to get out of what you were doing.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear more about your story, some of maybe your aha moments along the way, and what keeps you motivated, inspired every day. I know that's kind of a bit of a list, but I know that you've got lots to share with us today, so I don't want to take any more of your time, anybody's time to take away from you. So please just go for it.
No pressure. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to meet both of you and be on your show and be able to, impart some of my experience, which hopefully will maybe influence someone or inspire someone to do something different in their life. You started a moment ago, you were saying about my experience working at the hotel. So perhaps I'll start with that and explain to everyone listening how that actually happened. So I had been working at this hotel for a number of years. And as you mentioned, I was also running a business full time in the evenings. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But specifically for this situation that we both got goosebumps, and I didn't even know what you were going to say, and I got goosebumps on it. So I want everyone listening to imagine the scenario. You work a full-time job. You're getting ready one morning to go to work. You've got the radio on, and all of a sudden the announcer on the radio comes on and says these exact words: 12-year-old boy, guest at a downtown hotel, murdered. And then the announcer goes away to a commercial. And I'm in the middle of putting on my makeup, getting ready, and I thought, oh my gosh, did I just hear this right? A 12-year-old boy murdered at a hotel downtown? my immediate thought then was to the family, because they didn't explain the circumstances. They literally said verbatim what I just told you. And all I could think of was just my compassion to that family and the situation and so on. And then my next thought was to the staff at that hotel. Just imagining what it would be like to be at the hotel or be going to work that day at that hotel. Just, the calls from clients, the media, all sorts of pressure and what was going on. And then, as I was sort of thinking about that, the announcer came back from the commercial and gave the name of my hotel.
Oh.
And in that moment, my life changed.
I bet.
Because I was the only sales manager at that hotel. I had other people in our sales department. There was director of marketing and sales who ran the team. There was a catering manager. There was an assistant. But essentially, we were the sales department. So I quickly get dressed, go to work, and I walked to the corner of where our hotel was. There was the forensic truck there. There was police right in front of the doors, of the front doors of the hotel. There was media outside. There were people standing all around. And I had to try and get by them and avoid the media to go into the front office, like to go through the front, past the front desk, and then up to our department on the second floor. And it's surreal now as I say it, but it was just amazing to be in that experience. And so essentially what happened was, it wasn't the hotel's fault. What happened was about 5:30 or so in the morning, one of the guests called down to the front desk and said that they could hear some moaning outside, and they didn't want to open their door because they didn't know what was going on. It's 5:30 in the morning. You wouldn't want to do that. So one of the staff came up, and right outside this guest's door with it was a man holding the 12-year-old boy outside the other room. And so they were in the room adjacent to that guest that called down, and it was actually the father holding his young son as his son bled out in the hallway.
Oh.
We later found out that the parent was visiting from Asia with that young son to visit the older son, who was in his 20s, who was going to a local university here. The mother was still away in, I believe it was Malaysia, if I remember correctly now. And what happened was there was some sort of argument, whatever, and the older brother stabbed the younger brother, and he bled out. So he died in the lobby, like literally in the hallway. So that was a tragedy in and of itself. But then, of course, now as staff, you're concerned about the staff that had to view this. You're concerned about all the staff that now have to move guests off that floor to other rooms. I'm now getting phone calls from my clients going, "Hey, Sharon, we just saw this on the news. Are you okay? Are the staff okay? What about our staff that are staying with you? Are they okay?" So you're fielding all these calls, and at the same time, you're trying to process all this. And the interesting thing was, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that this happens to, but throughout our life, whatever you call it, God, the universe, whatever, gives us little kicks in the butt or little whispers, and we don't notice it. And sometimes it gets louder and louder, because I realized over those next few days that if I truly wanted to step into what I felt I was brought here on this earth to do, then it was no longer at that time being a sales manager at a hotel, but it was for me to really fully embrace my other business, which, I had, as you mentioned, I was a coach since 2002, before everybody were calling themselves coaches. People didn't know what a coach really was, except if you coached, say, a soccer team or a basketball team. So I decided that was it. I had to jump. And so that's what I did about 18 months ago, was I decided that I was going to go wholehearted into running my own business. And with all the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur, and it certainly has been an eye-opener and a challenge, especially for someone like myself who has always been around other people, worked as part of a team, sought to deliver for the owners of the business in whatever business I was in. But as I said, there are times when that happens. I think back to actually another time of when I got a little whisper and I ignored it was, do you remember when Princess Diana died?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Many, many years ago. So Princess Diana and I are about 2 months, in fact, to the day, I'm 2 months older than her. And at the time, I was on a tour around Europe. And we had left, the group tour had left Europe, or had left Paris, actually, the night she died. we woke up the next morning in London, and there was this announcement that Princess Diana had died in Paris. And so it's like, man, she's just like 2 months younger than me, and she died very young. So it was like, what am I doing with my life? What do I want to do? And it did move me into different directions, but you always wonder, did I move in the right direction? Did I move as further as I could where I needed to go? We can never change anything in our lives. Everything is experience. So it's just about adding on to that experience. So that gives you a bit of perspective of what happened to me and where I am right now, perhaps.
Wow. And when you said about the about things like, you know, that whisper and it gets louder and louder and louder, I've done a bit of coaching myself. I did it for about 5 years, and I call that the 2x4 to the back of the head. Because it is, if we're not going to learn that lesson, then, you know, it's going to get louder until we actually, if it's something we're supposed to be doing or following. That's been my experience, and I've actually seen it with a lot of other people. Have you seen the same thing?
I have, you know, and sometimes, you know, we're meant to learn a lesson, or sometimes it's meant we're supposed to go into a different direction. And also with myself, having been a coach for that long, I've worked with, all sorts of people all over North America, different parts of the world, from young college-age students up to people in their 60s, and anywhere from salespeople to CEOs to multimillionaires. And here's actually something that I've gained my knowledge from watching all these people, no matter what their position, how old they were, their financial situation, their education. This is what I've noticed distilled down about people. Two things. At the utmost importance to everyone, I believe, whether they realize it or will admit it, is one, they want to know that they were loved, and they want to know that they made a difference.
Absolutely.
And for some people in our world today, that's hard for them to realize. And here's the thing, I don't normally share the good things, the good deeds that I do. But I'd like to share with you a situation that happened a few months ago in Toronto that still moves me when I think about it. There's this favorite pizza place that I go to, and I can never eat the whole pizza. It's just too big. So in the past, I used to break it in half and then bring it home. But I noticed as I'd leave this location, it's right downtown Toronto, there were a lot of homeless people. So in the end, what I would do is, as soon as and the pizza people know me, and so they're already prepared for it, I go and I order my pizza, and I get 3 boxes. And as soon as I get my pizza and sit down, I put 1 slice of 3 slices I take away from mine, and I put them into 3 different boxes.
Okay.
And I put napkins in it and so on. And then when I leave, I find 3 people that I can share at least that nice slice of pizza. And this is the type of pizza place where it's not a big chain, but you can build your own. Because they know I'm going to share it with homeless people, they'll put on as much chicken as I want, as much vegetables as I want, way beyond probably what they'd normally do for other people.
That's nice.
So in their way, they're helping too. And there was a situation a few months ago where this I know, sitting outside the pizza place. And like a lot of homeless people I go up and say, "Hi, my name's Sharon. What's your name?" And they'll tell me their name. And I go, "Hey, listen, I've got some pizza. I'd love to share it with you. Would you be interested?" "Yes, thank you." And we have a little conversation. And sometimes I'll stay longer or whatever, but I usually also bend down, so I'm sort of at their level if they're sitting down. And I want them to feel seen. There was this one man, for some reason, I don't know why, I ended up sitting down next to him, and his name was John. And I said, "John, I want to tell you something." And he said, "What's that, Sharon?" Because I'd introduced myself. I said, "John, I want you to know that you're important and that you matter in this world." He grabbed my hand and he started to well up his eyes. And then I said something which I've actually never said to a homeless person before. I said, "Here's something else, John, I want you to know." "What's that, Sharon?" "I know we've just met, but I need you to know that I love you." I can't explain why I felt moved to do it, but I got to tell you, I probably benefited more out of that than he did, because, it's like, because you feel great when, even though if you're trying not to, you just feel great that you are making somebody know that they've been seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I have numerous experiences like that. I mean, sometimes I can't find people right away outside the pizza place, depending on the time of day. I'll walk around the streets of downtown Toronto until I've given those extra pieces away. It's just, but I always want people to know how important they are and how much they matter. And that, I think, has been through a lifetime of traveling the world in whether it be my job or just moving countries or my interests. And, we joked at the beginning where I said my guilty pleasure is of being a people watcher. And it is. I've learned so much about how to live my best life, or how to be a person of integrity, or how to make a decision in a certain circumstance by watching what other people do or don't do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also why I've been able to help so many people in my business, or even when I worked at the hotel or any other job, because I was gathering all this experience watching how people show up. Even just yesterday, I was on the subway, and this woman walked on who was blind, so she had a cane. She had a helper with her. And none of these people, now I was already standing, but none of these people, even sitting in handicapped seats, got up.
Oh.
Didn't get up and didn't do that. And I noticed the same thing when I got on the bus afterwards. And in the end, it was a young person that gave up their seats. And when I say young, a lot of times there's all this stuff in the media about millennials and, they're taking advantage of us and they don't work hard and all, it's all these labels that we, or the media, and we feed on it, put on people. But this young person gave up their seat. And I'm the type of person, when I see something like that, if it's possible without embarrassing them, I acknowledge them for it.
Right.
I did the same the other day with a nanny and a little boy. This young woman got up and gave the seat so they could sit together. And as I was walking out later on, I went up to her and I said, that was a very nice thing you did. She went, no, it's okay. I'm like, no, not everyone does it. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for being a great example to other people here. And I think that's something that we all forget. Especially now we're in the digital age. I get on the subway and I purposely count how many people are sitting in my section, and then I'll count how many people are on their devices. And it's typically, and this is not an exaggeration, 70 to 80% of the people in that section are so wired into their device. And it's such a shame. We're losing touch with each other.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you there. That's awesome, because, it fits with what you were talking about. It fits in with, wanting to know they're loved and wanting to know they matter.
Yeah.
And that's awesome that you do that. So kudos to you. Sean, do you have anything to add? I know you've been listening. You just weren't on screen.
You know what I found when I lived in Toronto? It's a very uptight city. Everybody's in a hurry. If you don't stand over on the right-hand side of the escalator, so they have room to go on the left side, it's kind of like New York. It's very uptight, and to say, I taught my kids very young, you open the door for anybody, doesn't matter if it's a good-looking girl. You'll hold the door open for grandma. You do all of the things that you should do. And I think that, to complement what you said, Sharon, is a lot of people have forgotten about that. People can't even say thank you, for crying out loud, for holding the door open for them if they got their hands full. They just walk by. It's like, really? I go to Tim Hortons yesterday, and I'm a Tim Hortons addict. I love Tim Hortons. I'm in there. And don't take this the wrong way, guys, because you guys are older than me, but this lady your age literally blew right through me, and I was like, she didn't even say boo, she didn't do anything, and I'm literally going, really?
That's where I go, you're welcome.
So
I did that, and I'm like, and then she's like right in line, and I'm like, excuse me, and she looks, oh, and then she goes to the back. I'm like, what is wrong with people?
So I have a comment regarding what you've just shared, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
You weren't in Toronto yesterday, were you?
No.
Where were you?
Edmonton.
So a moment ago, you said about Toronto, about people being this way.
It's all
what
over.
I found.
It's all over, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Because here's what I see too is that a lot of people will judge Toronto for being, uptight and all of this, and then compare us to places like New York and so on. And I think part of it, from my experience, I'll tell you, I've lived here since 1988. I moved here when I was 2. Do the math, everyone. No, I've been here that long. And I will tell you, I think part of the challenge is because it's such a big city, there's so many people, so that it's magnified. So if you have rude people in Edmonton, but you have rude people in Toronto, because there's more people, it seems like there's more people that are rude. I'm not saying that, this is not kind of comparing Toronto to Edmonton or anywhere else. What I'm doing is showing my perspective on how we label people and places, because this happened to you in Edmonton. It happens to me too. But I'll tell you also, yesterday while I was on the subway and walking around, I was holding doors open and other people were thanking me, or people were holding the door open for me. And this is in downtown Toronto. I think what happens too is that also people don't know how to help sometimes. So a perfect example about, okay, so you know how some people have had the saying, there's your plans and then there's God's plans?
Yeah.
Okay, you've heard that saying before, and in no way am I being religious here. I'm just referring to that saying. So I'll give you a perfect example of people wanting to help. So, and this is in Toronto. So on Saturday, my plan had been to go to the library to pick up some books and then go immediately to the gym. I thought that the library closed at 5:30. I get there at 5:03 and the library's already closed. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll have to come another day, but I'm going to head to the gym. As I'm walking down the street, for some reason, I felt impressed to go into my iPhone and look at Facebook. Now, I can honestly look you in the eye, or at least the camera, and tell you that I've actually never walked down the street and been in my Facebook app. I've been on a streetcar or I've been waiting for a bus or something, but never walking physically, because I know what can happen. You can fall, hurt yourself, run into people. But for some reason, I felt impressed to go onto the Facebook group or Facebook and look at it on my little iPhone. And there was a post by someone I know who was upset because of what somebody had said or did to them. So I immediately thought, heck, I'm not in a rush. I'm going to go into this building, sit down, because I know that they've got an area to sit down, and I'm going to call my friend on the cell phone and just say, hey, how's it going? Can I offer any support? Do you want to chat? Whatever. I walk into that building ready to sit down, and I see this elderly woman, like 68 or 69 she was, and her nose is bleeding, and there's 2 young women with her. I've been trained as a first responder because at the hotel that's what we did, so I immediately went over to help. These 2 young women had brought this woman in from the street because she had fallen. So these are 2 young women in downtown Toronto that most people would label, well, they're probably too busy on their cell phones or they don't have time. They were looking after her. I walk in now because I'm a first responder, and she's got a scarf on because I could tell she'd had chemo. So I'm now more concerned about what's happened to her and why she, fell. These two young women stayed with me and her until they knew that it was okay to leave her. That's how they wanted to, be there for this woman so that she wasn't on her own. So I think sometimes it's more about how people don't know how to help rather than they don't want to help at all. Or they're sometimes too engaged in their devices anywhere in the world, because I've traveled worldwide and there's people in Sydney, Australia, or in Hawaii or London, England that are like on their devices. And I think that's a challenge. I don't think that people inherently don't want to help. They just don't want to maybe get involved because they don't know what's going to be required or how long it's going to take, or does the person want them to be there, right? Rather than, I live in a big city, Toronto, and nobody cares. Personally, I stay in Toronto because I don't know if you know this, but Toronto has been deemed the most culturally diverse city in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We have more nationalities, more people from other countries than any other city on the planet, according to the UN. And with that, you have challenges, obviously, for people to get along or know what's right. But at the same time, you have a melting pot of just all these people that want to help each other and get to know each other. So I just wanted to share sort of my perspective on that.
So I can see that you've got a really great attitude. You're very optimistic and things like that. And I'm really curious as to how, like, were you raised that way? Was your family, your parents like that, or is it just something you've developed over time? Because I can see that you've got a very, very world view. You're not judgmental. And some people just need some help with kind of figuring that out, how to move into that place.
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's the thing: if every single person on here right now were watching, and we all took a knife and we slashed our wrists, every single one of us, what color would the blood be?
Red.
Right. Every single one of us.
Yeah.
All this is packaging.
Mm-hmm.
Our gender is packaging. Our religion is something that we choose or not choose or whatever it is. But ultimately, as I said earlier, I believe everyone wants to feel that they're loved and that they made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing that binds us together. I don't know that I don't know even, and I'm not a scientist, whether people are born positive or negative. I see over time, depending on people's experiences, that depending on the circumstance, they can be influenced by it.
Mm-hmm.
In my family, my parents, when I was very young, we talked about me living in Australia. I was 9 years old when my family sold their business, moved to Australia. And that was again, you can work out my age. I'm actually 56. So save you all the math. Just turned 56 and proud of it. But I was 9 years old at the time. We moved there in 1970. That was before Google existed or even the internet. And my parents took a big risk selling their home in Montreal and moving to a country they really knew nothing about.
Wow.
And they did that because they believed that they were going to give their family a better life. Because at the time when we lived in Montreal, there was the French separatist problems. There was a lot of bombings and a lot of confusion as to what was going to happen. So my parents decided they've got a daughter that's 9, a son that's 6. We got to move them. And instead of moving somewhere else in Canada, they just thought, hey, let's move to this new country and start all over again. It was not easy. My parents went through a lot. There was a lot of challenges. He went down, my dad, without a job. We ended up staying for a couple of weeks with my mom's best friend's family who lived there. She was Australian. But they took a lot of chances, and not everything worked out perfectly. But I think ultimately being positive is a choice. Mm-hmm. Am I positive all the time? Absolutely not. You know why? Because the universe seeks balance. You can't have one without the other. We don't have night without day, right? We don't have cold without heat, as we've talked about. No matter where you are in the world, even if you're in the Antarctic, there will be times where it's a little warmer than it is colder, right? So I believe that having your mindset however you want it is actually a choice. And it's a choice sometimes moment by moment, depending on what happens. I often say to my coaching clients when I first start working with them that you cannot control the thoughts that come in your head because they come from all different sources. Whether it's you see a billboard or you listen to news on TV or you're listening to somebody standing at the bus stop next to you that starts spouting hate or whatever it is. You can't control what comes into your mind, but what you can do is control how long it stays there.
And how you react to it too.
Absolutely. So there's a great formula that I learned from my mentor. You've heard of Jack Canfield?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So Jack mentored and trained me for about a year and became a personal friend of mine as a result. And he taught me this formula when I first started working with him. E plus R equals O. So the letter E plus R equals O. And what that stands for is the event plus your response, not your reaction, because reaction is always the first thing, but your actual response to the event equals your outcome. Mm-hmm. Right? So as an example we'll go back to when I was working at the hotel that day with the tragedy that happened. The event was a young boy got murdered in my hotel. Mm-hmm. My response was, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? This young boy was 12 years old. He lost his. What time do I have left? Well, we don't know. But what do I want to do with that time? What mark on the world or my world do I want to make? It doesn't have to be a global thing, but it could be your little world, right? And that will dictate my outcome. So I look at that the same way as, if somebody yells at you, as an example, and calls you a name, that's the event. That's actually what happened. Your response to that event will determine the outcome. Say you decide, I'm not going to put up with that. I'm going to beat this dude down. Well, the response is now he gets maybe all bloodied. Maybe he gets hurt. Maybe he hits his head and goes unconscious. The result is you're taken off to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Or the response could be, that guy doesn't even know me. So I'm not going to bother with him. I'm going to walk away. I do speaking to lots of different audiences, but one group I particularly like are teenagers. And I still remember this day, I was actually speaking at an event for 12 and 13-year-old girls. And I was telling them about this and how you can control and decide what you're going to react to. So I walked over to this young girl who was sitting in the audience, and I said, I want to tell you something. And she didn't know what this was going to happen, right? So she played along and I went, I want you to know I think you're ugly. So everyone else was like, oh, like I'm the speaker. Why would I do that, right? And even the adults in the room, they didn't know what was going to happen. I went, I think you're ugly. You know why I think you're ugly? She looks at me and didn't know what to say. I went, because you've got purple hair. She looked at me and she goes, no, I don't. My hair is brown. I went, exactly. I said it was purple, same as I said you're ugly. What do I know? That's just my opinion. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's true. Do you know, years later, I ran into this young woman, and she told me that, I know, it was amazing. She ran in and told me when she was 18 how much that moment helped her get over feeling bad about herself, because she realized she was able to take her power back. Another goosebump moment. Mm-hmm. Realized nobody could decide who or what she was. Only she could. That for me is like what drives me, honestly, to get up in the morning. How I work to make my day. How I work to influence and help other people. Now, some days it's just me working at my desk and I'm not even talking to the world. But then I work on myself. A lot of people think that they have to spend thousands of dollars traveling around the world attending events. They have to spend thousands of dollars and hours reading books. Now, you can't see my office. I have like 7 bookshelves, and they're stacked with books. I have spent so much money on personal development. My accountant gets a heart attack every tax season. But that's just me. That's my choice. But I also do it because I want to be that person that helps inspire other people. So I'm doing that work not only for myself, but for other people that I connect with, whether it be something like this interview or, you know, going up to the young woman on the subway the other day and thanking her for giving up her seat to the nanny and the little boy, whatever it is. But you don't even have to do any of that. It's just about being self-aware. So you said earlier, my philosophy is you have to be a leader in your own life before you ever lead other people. And that's where a lot of people, especially leaders in organizations, get it wrong. They think that they have to lead people sort of down, and they're in charge, therefore they're this way, and you know, they're the boss and people have to do what they say, but they don't have their own crap together. Mm-hmm. So there's an inauthenticity, there's a lack of integrity often. People don't buy into what you're saying because they see how you act in the world. And that's why I say it doesn't matter whether you're an ER doctor, whether you're a minister to church, whether you're CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you're a stay-at-home mom. It's about working on yourself first. And when you've worked on yourself, then you could lead whoever it might be.
So would you term that as, like, let's say the business, okay? So rather than being a leader, those people you're talking about would be more of a manager. Would that be a good distinction between the two in some ways?
Yeah, you know what? It could very well be, because my definition of leader is not necessarily you have employees working for you. My definition, a short version of a leader, is someone who inspires others and who is a great role model for others to emulate.
But I'm talking about just in a workplace environment.
Yeah, and that's exactly.
Yeah. So,
it's like in a workplace, you've got people that have managed, but they're called leaders by their organization or their, you know, job title or whatever their profession is. They're seen as leaders, but are they really leading, or are they just managing people?
Right.
And I also think that you could be a leader when you're a subordinate, when you're working for someone else. So, you know, here's a question I often ask my audiences, and I'll ask you guys. If you were to build a 20-story building, would you build it from the ground up? Would you just like start building from the street level, build that 20-story building, or would you do something different?
Well, you always have to start with the foundation and go up.
Why?
So it's strong.
Exactly. And so if you were going to, you. You win. So let me ask you this question as a follow-up. If you were going to build a 3-story home compared to a 20-story building, would your foundation be the same or would it be different?
Totally stronger with the 20-story.
Exactly. So you'd have to go deeper and build a stronger foundation for the higher you want to rise. So that's very much like our lives. And everyone watching this, I hope they take this away. If you want to live a mediocre life, if you just want to get by, then you don't really have to work on yourself. You can build that very small little basement of a foundation. But if you want to step up and find out why you were put here, what you can do, if you want to live on purpose, as I say, I often talk to people about living on purpose. If you want to live on purpose, then you're going to want to build a deeper foundation, because that 20-story building, if it's got a deep foundation, if we're actually physically talking about a physical structure, the deeper the foundation, then when there's ground rumbling or a mini earthquake or something, it's not going to topple over. If the weather comes in, there's a big hurricane, the deeper the foundation, it's going to hold up that building stronger, right? So that's kind of the analogy I use, or metaphor, however you want to term it, depending on how much a person wants to live their life on purpose, either to contribute to others or just live their best life. Then they want to work on themselves and build that deep foundation.
So I have a question for you. I have more of a statement kind of / question.
Yes.
What do you do in the instance, and we obviously know that you guys watching this, we don't pitch here. We want to give a scenario. So we have some people here, Sharon, that expect us to do everything for them, and they're not taking accountability, they're not taking responsibility for the programs or businesses that they're in. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because if it's to be, it's up to me.
That's a great way of putting it.
The scenario that we have, and it comes about, I would say, at least, goosebump moment, 3 times a freaking day. Okay. You didn't help me, you don't have time for me, blah, 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 all those things. And you ask them 2 questions or maybe 3. Have you opened the training? No. Have you spent any time in your business? No. When's the last time you spent time in your business or program or whatever? 3 weeks ago. Okay. So what do you say to those people when you're trying to lead them in the right direction? You can lead them to the water, but you cannot force them to drink. And you keep telling them, and you know, I've shown you a system that works. Mm-hmm. I've given you the tools. Now it's up to you, because I can't do the work for you.
Right.
What would you say to those people in that scenario when they always try and use you as the scapegoat because you're either the sponsor or the person that brought them into that business? What would you say to them?
Okay, so I've actually coached a lot of people in the networking, marketing sort of space as well. So if it's similar to that, I definitely understand where that's coming from. But it doesn't exist there. It can also be an employee in a regular business using the same excuse, right? Or a husband saying it to the wife, or a kid saying it to the parent, or anywhere, right? Any scenario. So the first thing the first thing I'd say, if they said, "Well, I didn't do this because of you," or something like that, I would actually stop and say to them, explain to me fully how it's my fault. What is it I have not done? So for 2 reasons. The first is to get the person to stop and think, oh, actually, no, I can't really tell you, because then they have to reflect upon themselves. That they realize, well, yeah, I don't really have an argument, because they've been looping this in their head. It's about somebody else. It's their fault. Mm-hmm. The second thing that can also do is you as the leader can stop and think, when you hear the feedback from that person, is there a gap in there in some way that you have not communicated properly? Is there something that they thought? So it helps to get rid of miscommunication or misrepresentation or misunderstanding, any of those scenarios. So just by stopping someone that's saying it's your fault, I haven't done it, okay, please help me understand how it's my fault. I'm not trying to push this back on you. I truly want to understand. So in a way, you've got to take a breath, because often as leaders, when we hear something like that, our back goes up. And we're thinking, hang on, I'm giving them all my help. I've told them what to do. I'm there for them. but you also don't understand it from their point of view. So right away, asking that question and waiting for the answer. And that's sometimes the hardest thing, is just to be silent. And it can be uncomfortable. But by being silent, it causes them to reflect. And then they have to be able to give you the reason. Because you've said, help me understand. I really do want to know, how is it my problem? Then they start giving you scenarios. Then you can start not attacking it, but addressing it. Mm-hmm. And you can say, okay, so you say you didn't know about A, B, and C. Okay, great. Well, let's sit down and talk about A, B, and C. Now, do you get where that's coming from? Do you understand now what your steps are and so on? So that's the majority of people. But then there's always that slight percentage of the population that will not take responsibility for their life in any way, shape, or form. They just won't do it. Whether it be an ego, or it be a history, or it be that they have a fear around taking a responsibility for something, you're always going to get people that are not going to do that. And so for me, one of the first principles I live by is to take 100% ownership for everything that happens in my life. Mm-hmm. Whether it be, as an example, I said before, when I'm walking down the street with my iPhone, going on a Facebook, had I have fallen, if I'd done that, whose fault would it have been? Some people go, well, there was a crack in the sidewalk, or the guy walked in front of me. No, I was watching my iPhone as I was walking.
Yeah.
My responsibility. So does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. And here's the sad part of the whole scenario. Even if you tell people, most people can't handle the freaking truth.
Sure.
And if I'm going to go and invest, okay, so I give this scenario. I was a manager at McDonald's in my 20s.
Yeah.
Right now, it's probably, I would say, $1 million to $2 million to get a franchise.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I would not be asking corporate to say, you know what, Sharon, this freaking month, this franchise system don't work. I want a refund. You're the one that signed the contract. You're the one that took the responsibility. You're the one that invested this. You buy yourself a full-time job, and if you invest the time that's required, and it's not spare time, it's part-time, meaning 15 to 25 hours a week that you commit because you made a decision to invest in a business, that you understand that, you know what, I get out of this business, I get out of this affiliate program, I get out of this program, whatever the heck it is, what I put in. The more I put in, the more I will get out.
Yeah.
And when you have that conversation with them and you just tell them, hey, Sharon, if you're not willing to invest the time in learning this, then you're going to get zero results.
Exactly. Yeah, and some people don't know about that until they're actually in it. Also, some people sell themselves on the fantasy of something like get rich quick, or, how many times do you look through your Facebook feed where there's ads that tell you, work 10 hours a week and make $50,000 a month, or, stuff like that. So there's a lot out there that people become susceptible to. Also, you as the leader don't understand what their background is or what they've experienced and where their frame mind is. So it's challenging for you because you obviously want to help people. You want them to be successful. But this is what I have learned. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that I've been a professional coach since 2002. I say to people when I'm chatting with them, maybe the first time, I say, you have to be prepared to show up on the calls and do the work. Because I can't want this more for you than you want it for yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it means that not everyone is the perfect customer, client, patient, member, family member, whatever it is for you. And sometimes it's about cutting them loose. It's like when you realize it's not going to work and you end, say, whether it be a friendship, a business partnership, an employment, whatever it is, there's that realization of this, that you are now releasing them to go and find out what's best for their life. And then it leaves you available to be there for the people that truly want to have what it is that you can help them with. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And the other thing to end this conversation, well, this part of it anyways, is when, you know, it's that crab bucket syndrome, you know, oh, they didn't do this, so I'm going to tell my friend, and then the friend steps in and said, oh, you did this and you didn't do this right and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I'm not even entertaining this conversation because every story has two sides of it. Yeah. And we're going down a rabbit hole that I'm not going down. You invested X amount of dollars. You weren't willing to take the time nor the effort or put in the sweat equity to make this happen and do simple tasks that you were asked to do. I'm sorry, but I can lead you to the water, but I can't force you to drink.
So it's interesting you said that there's two sides to the story. I actually look at it slightly different, the same sort of idea, but slightly different. I believe that there's their story, your story, and what actually happened. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right? Because we all have our own little take on what's going to happen. I think, too, that it's important for us as leaders to properly document things as well. So, you know, if you're helping someone, if they're in your program, if they come to work with you or whatever it is, it's to be able to document. Mostly people rely on their memory. If I asked you now what you had for breakfast on Saturday morning in detail and at what time exactly did you eat, could you tell me?
Yeah.
You might, but most people couldn't. So yeah. 50% in this conversation, and if we added me into it, then 2/3 of the conversation would take out, right?
Yeah.
Sean, I'm concerned that you would know that, but there could be a reason, so we won't get into it. My essential thought here is, though, we have very short attention spans and memories in most cases, so we forget about these things. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you're going, look, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, so on, they're already defensive because they're trying to make you wrong. But if you were to say, look, we had a conversation on this date, this is what we talked about, and you agreed to go and take these actions. When I followed up on this date, you still had not done that, and you had enough to back that up, at the very least you can walk away knowing free and clear that you've done everything you could, and you did your best to communicate it with that person. Whatever they decide to do, you're not responsible for. But this is also what I know. Nobody can make you feel any way. If someone will say, oh, he said this to me and he upset me. No, he said this to me and I chose to be upset. Mm-hmm. Right? So even in the case of a leader, you get to choose how it goes back to the E plus R equals O scenario again. So I always say, because, you know, Julia, you asked me earlier at the conversation about being positive. It's a choice, and it's a choice every day. There are some days when, you know, I'm feeling kind of crappy. But luckily, because of all the personal work that I've done on myself over the years, plus being a people watcher, I don't tend to have bad days. I have bad moments, just like a little kid does. I have bad moments. Now, honestly, sometimes those moments string together. They're like a little longer. But I choose to look beyond what's happening and think, okay, if I'm going to sit here and get upset about this, what's going to be the result of that? Is it getting me any closer? And there's the other thing too, you know, so many people are walking around upset with other people or annoyed or holding on to anger. The person you're upset with may not even know that you're upset or why you're upset, or they've moved on, but you're reliving it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow.
Lots of people like that.
Boom. That was a nail. That was a big spike. That was a nail on that. Well, there's not a nail, a big spike. That was a smash on the hammer.
Love it.
Awesome.
And we can choose, like you said, to be happy, to be, I mean, if we don't choose to be positive and happy, then we're just kind of going with whatever comes our way and swept away with it in some cases, and then we're not in control of anything.
So I'm going to share with you a great story about this. This is someone, when I'm giving keynotes, I talk about people that have influenced my life, and it's not necessarily people like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or the big guys out there. It's often people that I notice, again, in my people watching. A number of years ago, another goosebump moment. A number of years ago, I was walking outside of my local bank, downtown Toronto, and right next to the bank there was this homeless man who was sitting on a milk crate. And, you know, like most cities, if you walk downtown or certain areas of the city, you often see homeless people sitting there either with maybe a ball cap on the ground waiting for feed, you know, to get people to contribute for money. or you get people that have a coffee cup, they're asking you to give them a donation. So this was a very different day for me because I was walking out of the bank, heading back to the hotel, and I noticed this man sitting on the crate, but instead of having a mug, or a cap or anything, he had this little gift bag. Those little gift bags you can get from the dollar store and put stuff in and, put some tissue paper in and give it away as a gift. So he had one of those. And it said on the front, it said, "Poems, $1. And inside, I saw these pieces of paper kind of rising out of the top. Not like the usual tissue paper you'd use to put in a bag, but they were little shapes. So I was really intrigued, and I went over to him, and I said, "What is it you're doing?" And he said, "I'm selling poems for $1." And it was so obvious to me that he lived on the street just by the way he was dressed. He didn't really have any belongings to him. So I asked him his name, told him mine. His name was Bill. And I said, "Well, what is it you're doing?" He said, "Well, I don't want to beg." He said, "So I write poetry. And every day I go to the local library and I take out pieces of paper that he buys from the dollar store, and he writes poems on it. And then he uses coloring pencils, again from the dollar store, and he designs around the poetry. So it's not just this, it's one piece of paper with poems. It's beautifully done. And then over time, the librarians had noticed what he was doing because he was going there every day. They ended up teaching him the art of origami, the paper art folding from Japan. And he had fashioned these pieces of paper into swans. So when I looked at the bag closer, I noticed they're all little swan heads, right? I was so impressed with this man. So of course I bought a poem. I gave him a loonie for us Canadians, $1, and that coin, and he gave me a poem. I go to work and I show it to my director of marketing and sales. She's a poet, and she's like so intrigued, and she goes, "This is great." She says, "I'm going to give you a toonie." So for those of you not Canadian, that's $2 in a coin. She said, "Go down and give him a toonie and bring me back a poem." "Sure, no problem." "Hey, Bill, I just showed my boss, and she wants to give you a toonie for a poem." And he goes, "Oh, what do you mean?" He goes, "You got to take 2 poems." "Well, no, Bill, she wants to give you toonie for a poem." He goes, "They're $1 each. You need to take 2. I was so impressed with this man. He was not looking for a handout. He was essentially an entrepreneur running his own business on top of a milk crate in downtown Toronto near a bank. He wasn't looking for anyone to give him anything. He wanted to give value. So even though this was technically a tip, he didn't want the tip. He wanted her to have 2 of the poems. So this is a man that could have been sitting on the side of a curb somewhere begging for money, or using the money to, go and use for, drugs or whatever, alcohol, whatever. He decided that no matter what his circumstance was going to be, that he was going to earn a decent and honest living.
That's huge.
Isn't that impressive?
Mm-hmm.
Very impressive.
Very much so.
That's got a lot of clout to share with a lot of other people out there. It's not making a fast buck, it's making an honest dollar.
Honest buck. And so here's another, we talked about attitudes and so on. I'll share with you one last story if I may.
Yeah, no problem.
Someone else that I met. So a number of years ago, again, while I was working at the hotel, I used to look after a group that would come in from Bermuda, the Bermuda Army Regiment. And there was, every year they would come up to Northern Ontario, the junior officer program. Who knew that the island of Bermuda had an army? I didn't until they called me one day and said, "We want to book our group in." Because they'd go up to Northern Ontario and spend like 5 days up there. And they would, be trekking around, jumping out of helicopters, 60-pound rucksack on their back, sleeping on the ground. And then after they'd all done this, they would come to Toronto, stay at my hotel, and then they would have a few days before they went back home. And I was often invited to go to the dinner that they would have as a celebration on the Friday night. So I'd already done a few of these over the years. And this one particular year, I met this young woman by the name of Alyssa. And she impressed me so much in that we were sitting across from each other. And I started talking to her. She was the first woman in 5 years to go through the junior officer program in the Bermuda Army Regiment. So right away, you knew she was pretty impressive because there were all these guys and she was the first woman in all these years. But that actually wasn't the thing that impressed me the most. I found out that several days before she and the rest of the troops were supposed to leave to come up to Toronto and Ontario, that she'd been in a car accident. And I could see the scars and the marks on her arms. I had presumed that they were from being out in the bush in Ontario, jumping out of planes and stuff, but it was because of the accident. She and her fiance had both been in the accident, but her fiance had died. And so the officers had said to her, Alyssa, you don't have to come to the training because of the situation. We understand. She didn't even make the funeral, from what I remember, but she had promised that she was going to go on this training. That was her commitment. That was her personal integrity. So she left her family behind. She came up to Northern Ontario, and several days into the training, she kind of hit a mental wall that she just lost it. Like, I'm sure the grief set in. So instead of, I mean, you can't leave. You're in Northern Ontario, out in the bush, and jumping out of planes and living off the ground. You can't just leave. So all these junior officer candidates and the officers of the regiment, they helped her for the next few days. They carried her physically and mentally because they believed in her and what she was able to accomplish. And I sat across from her at this dinner as all these junior officers and the officers of the regiment stood up and gave her a standing ovation. And I was so moved by this young girl in her early 20s that she had all this integrity, that she was going to do this no matter what. She said her fiance would want her to do that. This is why I say that my guilty pleasure in a way is to be a people watcher, because it's stories like this that help me to be a better person, to help me share stories such as what I'm doing now, to maybe reach out to someone that's listening to this and think, how can they do something different in their life? How can they be a better example to their staff, their kids, their spouse, their community, whatever it is? How can we all step up and live more fully?
That's awesome.
Okay, Sharon, now you've put me in tears twice today. If I'd have known, I would have had Kleenexes on hand.
You just need a longer shirt, Julia.
Of all the stories of people that have touched my life. So when you ask, how do you be positive? How can you not be inspired when you have that opportunity to learn and be part of, all these people? I mentioned about the woman that I ran into on Saturday that her nose was bleeding. I found out that her kids, one was at a wedding and one had gone away because we had a long weekend here this past weekend in Canada, and she was on her own. I was not going to let her travel to the hospital on her own. She had just had her 5th chemo treatment a week or so ago. How can you do that? And I thought, well, I was going to the gym. Heck, I can go to the gym another day. I'll go later. I got in the ambulance with her and went up to the hospital to stand by her side until the daughter who had gone to the wedding, she was able to reach her and have her come and take her. But you know what? I would have helped her get home if that was the case. She didn't want to be on her own, but she also didn't want to influence or affect, her daughter and her husband out for the night. And I say all these things, please, whoever's listening, please don't take it that I'm trying to make myself seem bigger than anyone else. Because like I said at the top, I don't usually share a lot of stuff of what I do with other people, but then sometimes I think we all need examples. I've heard other people that have helped people, and I thought, yeah, you know what? If I was in that situation, I'll step up and do it. So I think we're all, I say to people all the time, we're all in this together. This thing we call life, every single one of us, we're all in it together. So we can either help each other, or like what happened at Manchester with, all these young people being killed and people attempting, to kill them. You can do that, or you can make judgments about, the president of the United States, or about Muslims, or about women, or about men, or people with disabilities, or whatever it is. It's like, people, get over yourself. You only have so many minutes. You know what? This is what I always start when I'm talking to audiences. I often talk about how we all have 168 hours a week, no matter who we are, how much money we got in the bank, our education, where we live, our job, or whatever. And at the very end, when I've given these stories and I've, shared my experience, or I've given the information to the group, I often stop this way and I go, I want you to listen to something. And so everyone's quiet and I go, do you know what you just heard? People don't know. And I go, I've just helped you understand that these are the precious seconds of that 168 hours in this week going by.
Yeah.
So what will you do differently?
Yeah.
And there's just a hush, because it sinks in that people are starting to realize, how am I spending that 168 hours a week? And it's going by a second at a time.
To what you said earlier, Sharon, and thank you for sharing that, by the way, most people are too worried about what's going on in their life rather than say, hey, you know what? There's always somebody, and there's at least 10 people that have got it way worse than we got it.
Yeah.
And we're having this little pity party inside our heads of going, oh, this, guess what? There's Nick. I don't know his last name. He's a nationally renowned speaker. He has a little flap as a foot, has no arms and no legs. There's Cam, who's in a wheelchair, who talks funny, that is a motivational and inspirational speaker as well. There's always somebody else out there 10 times worse than us.
Yeah.
We have to have more of an attitude of gratitude to be thankful for what we do have versus pray for what we don't have. And a lot of people has that scenario of, oh, money, 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 money. No, it's not about the money. You serve others, like you said earlier, it will automatically serve you. When you give, you get. Zig Ziglar talks about it a lot. When you help enough other people get what they want, you will get what you want. It's a win-win. Exactly. And people got it all backwards about, oh, well, you know, Sharon and Julia, I got this cell phone bill coming up. It's like $300 freaking dollars, and I got a car payment and car insurance, and I got to feed myself, and got child support. If I go and do something for others, always with no intention of worrying about what I'm going to get out of it, it's automatically going to happen.
Yeah.
And because of our jobs that we used to have and the jobs that people have now, for the people that are watching, there's a reason why you need to have more than one paycheck. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The storms are going to come into your life. Are you going to be prepared? Are you going to have that safety blanket? Are you going to have the extra resources to, example, fly to the Philippines if mom gets sick, go to Europe if case grandma gets sick? All of these things, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
For sure.
What are you doing to protect yourself? How are you protecting your family? And if you want to have one source of income, I would highly recommend you to look at other sources for the people watching to get another one. Because if that one goes away, you're left with your pants down, and it's not a good position to be in.
For sure. Most definitely. I'm a great advocate of having multiple streams of income, but I think too that you shore yourself up in your attitude beforehand. So, you know, you gave a scenario of people are worried about all their bills, but if you take even a moment off to go and help someone else, for that brief moment, you're not thinking about your bills anymore. Because like I said earlier, you can only have one thought residing in your mind at a time. So now if you're engaged with someone else, it gives you a little bit of a respite about worrying about how you're going to pay your bills.
Yep. Exactly. And if you're in the, like yourself, you do coaching and mentoring and all that other stuff, you know that, hey, if you help this client and they say, hey, this Sharon gal, I mean, she's from Toronto, she is knocking it out of the park, she's helped me, you got a warm and fuzzy referral that you're going to connect with, and hey, guess what? That's more revenue for you.
Absolutely. I'm very big into referrals, and the best way that you get referrals is often by helping other people.
Exactly.
Successful in their own business, their own life, whatever it is. Yeah, and it really comes down to we're all into this together, people. Mm-hmm. None of us are escaping on our own, you know. And the more you can increase someone else's quality of life, it will come back to you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we ain't getting out of this deal alive.
Nope.
And there's two things guaranteed in death and taxes. So you know, most people, Sharon, and thank you for your time today. Most people would rather die than do videos. And you know what? I would rather do videos than die, because I know that, you know what, there's a greater purpose, and we got to go be more purposeful in our lives to help more people.
For sure. Most definitely.
Absolutely.
So guys, I'm going to say thank you so much, Sharon. It was a blessing to have met you. We look forward to connecting again. Guys, if you are not in your mental game, there's no room for rent in a positive mind. And like Tom Hopkins said, one of my mentors from way back in the sales part of my life, in journey of the entrepreneur, what are you doing to help others help yourself? It's not always about you, it's about them. So thank you guys for this awesome session. We look forward to connecting with you again. We would love to have you on our show again at some point in time in the near future, Sharon. It was
I'd love that.
Take care, guys. Have a great day, and we will see you on the next edition of Success with Dynamic Duo. Make it a great week. Make a decision to commit to your life to make changes once and for all. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.